Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Title: I moved into a haunted house and found a horrifying secret in the basement. I had always wanted to live in an old house, one with a bit of history. So, when I found an old Victorian home on the outskirts of town for a price that seemed too good to be true, I jumped at the chance. It had this eerie charm that drew me in, with its creaky wooden floors, dusty corners, and an attic that hadn't been touched in years. It was exactly the kind of place I had always dreamed about. The first few nights were quiet. Sure, the house made strange noises now and then, settling creaks, the occasional draft, but nothing I wasn't prepared for. That's the kind of thing that happens with old houses, right? At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But then, something changed. It was on the fourth night that I first heard it. A soft, rhythmic knocking. It came from the basement, a place I hadn't even set foot in yet. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just the old pipes. But the knocking persisted, every night, always around 3:15 a.m. I would lie in bed, clutching the blankets, my heart pounding as the knocks echoed through the floorboard. Finally, after about a week of this, I decided enough was enough. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down to the basement. As I descended the rickety stairs, the air grew colder, and I noticed an unsettling smell, like damp earth mixed with something rotten. I swept the beam of the flashlight around, but everything seemed normal. Just a bunch of old furniture, a few boxes, and cobwebs covering nearly every corner. The knocking had stopped, and I almost convinced myself it was all just my imagination.
But as I was about to head back up, something caught my eye. There was a small door at the far end of the basement, almost hidden behind a stack of boxes. It was about 4 feet tall, painted the same color as the walls, and had a rusty old lock on it. I didn't remember seeing it on the initial walkthrough, but I figured it was just a small storage space. I hesitated for a moment before finally deciding to open it. I had to know what was inside. The lock was stiff, but after some fiddling, it clicked open, and I pulled the door ajar. A cold gust of air rushed out, making me shiver. I pointed the flashlight inside and saw a narrow passage leading downward, deeper into the earth. The knocking began again, louder this time, echoing up from the dark passage. It was as if someone was down there, trying to get out. I should have turned around and walked away, but there was this strange pull, a curiosity that overpowered my fear. I took a deep breath and started down the passage. The further I went, the more the air seemed to thicken, becoming harder to breathe. The passageway sloped down at a steep angle, and the walls were rough, almost like they had been carved out of the earth with crude tools. The knocking grew louder, faster. It felt like it was just ahead of me. The passage finally opened up into a small, cramped room. It was pitch black, but when I shined my flashlight around, my blood ran cold. The walls were covered in scratches, deep grooves dug into the stone. In the middle of the room was an old wooden chair, and on it sat a ragged doll, its face cracked and faded, with button eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The knocking had stopped, but I could still hear something else. A faint whispering. It seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, like a dozen voices mumbling at once. I stepped closer to the chair, my hands shaking as I reached out to touch the doll. The moment my fingers brushed against it, the whispers grew louder, almost like screams. I backed away quickly, my heart pounding in my ears. As I turned to leave, I noticed something carved into the wall behind the chair. It was a name, Emily, and beneath it were the words, "Help me." The letters looked old, worn by time, but they still held a sense of desperation. I didn't know who Emily was, but it was clear that something terrible had happened down here. I ran back up the passage and slammed the small door shut, locking it behind me. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I kept hearing those whispers, even when I was wide awake. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong with this house. There was something evil here, something that wanted to be found. The next day, I started researching the house's history, and what I found made my skin crawl. The house had belonged to a family named the Millers in the early 1900s. They had a young daughter named Emily, who went missing when she was just 10 years old. They searched for her for weeks, but she was never found. The case eventually went cold, and the family moved away, leaving the house abandoned for years before it was sold again. I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was still here. Trapped somehow, I needed to find out more. That night, I went back down to the basement with a crowbar and forced the small door open again. This time, I wasn't alone. I brought a tape recorder with me, hoping to capture some evidence of what was happening. As I reached the small room at the bottom, I set the recorder on the chair and pressed record. I asked a few questions. Is anyone here? What happened to you? But there was no response. Just that suffocating silence. I played back the recording and felt my blood turn to ice. At first there was just static, but then I heard a faint voice, almost like a child's. Help me, it whispered. I'm cold. Then there was a loud bang, and the recording cut off. I dropped the recorder and bolted out of the basement, slamming the door behind me. I wanted to leave the house, but something kept me from doing it. Some kind of force. It was as if the house wouldn't let me go. The next morning, I found scratches on the inside of my bedroom door. They hadn't been there the night before. I knew then that whatever was in the basement wasn't going to stay down there. It was coming for me. I left that day and never went back. The house still stands at the edge of town, abandoned once more. Sometimes I think I can still hear that knocking when I drive past late at night. I don't know what happened to Emily, but I'm sure of one thing. That house holds a darkness that should never be disturbed. If you ever find yourself drawn to an old house with a mysterious past, do yourself a favor and stay far, far away. Some doors are meant to stay closed,